What role does student choice have in your classroom? We know that when students have some ownership over their learning, that they're more intrinsically motivated, and this leads to real agency in their learning. So today's episode is a leveling up episode where I coach Jen, who's a Spanish teacher in Missouri. Providing students with regular and authentic choices in her classroom is the area where she wants to level up her teaching. So let's start the conversation. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. My name is Joshua Cabral, and I thank you so much for listening to a podcast about language teaching. It's just one of those many things that makes you an incredible teacher. Speaking about incredible teachers who want to be introspective about their teaching, I'm going to be talking today with Jen. She is a Spanish teacher in Missouri, and we're going to have a leveling up coaching episode. And the area that Jen wants to focus on with her teaching is student choice and increasing student choice in her classroom. What is it in your classroom where you feel like there's could be some more choice involved in here?
Yeah, so right now, especially both my lower and upper levels, so like my levels 1 and 2, they have a lot of independent practice time. And I try to offer them a lot of different choices of platforms and modalities, but it's not always like true choice. If I'm clear, like it's not they're determining all of the vocabulary or they're determining all of the content. They're determining how they're practicing a prescribed content, which is not really choice. So I want to try. It's hard for me to let go. And then with my upper levels, they do have quite a bit more choice. But what I'm finding is sometimes when I'm giving them these inquiry options, they're kind of floundering in the pursuit of it. Like they really get into one idea and they pursue it for a little while. They feel like they hit a roadblock, and just coaching them through those roadblocks has been really hard. So that's kind of it's two different beasts that I'm dealing with, and I'd like to make both of them a
Okay.
little better.
And when you find that happening in your classroom, what are some things that you have tried to say, I'll say mitigate it, but what are some things that you have tried that have not been successful?
The lower levels where it's more about how they choose to practice, a lot of them, instead of like leaning into some things that might be uncomfortable, like instead of like doing some more speaking practices on some platforms or some games that require talking, they'll tend to immediately gravitate towards the gamification options because they're a little less risk taking, a little more. And so those are areas where I'm like, ooh, especially students who I know I have some auditory folks, and I'm like, you learn by listening, you learn by speaking, and you're choosing a visual modality because you can just click. Does that make sense? Like they're not 100% engaging. So I wish there were some way to make those things more attractive for them, and so it's not so transactional. And then for my upper levels, yeah, when we've gotten to those roadblocks where it's like, okay, you're on a creativity project and you said you wanted to learn more about a certain area. So I let them choose like any kind of area of creativity. And so it's so broad. Like one person decided to study how to do certain like moves in soccer. And so they were like watching tape from different soccer games. And the initial research of it was going pretty well. But when it came to transitioning that, because they were supposed to then produce something inspired by what they observed, turning that into something that they could use. Oh, now I can go do this and I can talk about it. It was either they got stuck with the vocabulary, like they didn't see that the vocabulary, like they weren't noting, oh, okay, so while I'm watching this, maybe I should note this is how they said this and this. Maybe I should look up these things to try to help me speak about it. And so when I try to like give them some ideas, like, oh, you might need like the word for create, or if you're doing this particular thing, you might need this vocabulary. it's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
clunky,
Clunky.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not
Mm-hmm.
quite there. And so it's like I feel like I need to tease that out so it's more natural instead of procedural, like step one, research,
Mm-hmm.
step two, this, step three, vocabulary,
Right.
step four, create. It seems very
Clunky. Yeah, clunky.
unnatural.
That was a good
Yeah,
word. That
clunky.
was
It's
a I
clunky.
totally. It feels clunky means you get there in the end, but it wasn't a really enjoyable trip sometimes, right? That's how I understand
Yes.
clunky. And so in your
Yeah.
22 years as a teacher, I'm sure you have had many moments of that was awesome, that worked. So in those moments where you are seeing some availability of choice or engaging your students in choice, where has that worked well? Where have you seen that work well in your classroom?
It really depends on like the way the class sees it,
Mhm.
if that makes sense, and how in tune they are with what they enjoy and like from the get-go, or how willing they are to take risks. Because in my classrooms where I've had, adventurous folks who are willing to try things outside of their comfort zone, or who are like, you know what, this really works for me. I'm kind of a self-actualized learner. I know that this is how I learn. Those situations, those kiddos really seem to gravitate towards, okay, I'm going to choose what works for me, or I'm going to choose this new thing that's going to challenge me. It's going to go. Where the classes that really struggle are like I said, this post-COVID environment where a lot of them are just still trying to re-engage with what is school, why am I here, with their
Mhm.
why is not always there. And two, they're kind of disconnected sometimes from learning as a process as opposed to like
Mhm.
education. Like they have, if sometimes they feel like, oh, I've got to
Mhm.
be here. They don't show up at my parents' door, but this is, cultivating. So it's like there's that disconnect, and I'm trying to help them see, like, at least do
Mhm.
something you like. If we're both stuck here, and let's find something you like.
So, if I were to walk into your classroom, this concern of how students are engaging with choice, it's not clunky. It is flowing and it is working well. If I walk in, what am I going to see students doing in your classroom and what am I going to see you doing in your classroom? Like the rose colored glasses of this is not a hurdle.
If it were kind of a perfect thing, they would be doing what they want to do just in language too.
Hmm.
Right? Especially at those upper levels where there's a lot of freedom in the content because they have a lot of those structures and things already. So I really wish, for them to be able to almost like each one doing their thing and I'm just guiding them in
Hmm.
their process. I would like, cause that's the goal. Like this group over here or this person over here could be working on, learning about bioluminescence and, I don't know, all the science. And this person over here could be listening to all the music and constructing things because, like, or there's, I have students who love theater. So maybe they're, watching this production and noticing,
Hmm.
trends in those areas. So like they have so much access to
Hmm.
so much input. And I will say part of my job would be to make sure that it's not too much
Hmm.
of a gap, like closing that gap between that authentic resource and what they can do, because sometimes I get kiddos who are really excited about something, but when they go to do it and interact with it, it's just too fast or too much unfamiliar vocabulary. So that rose zone,
Hmm.
that comfort zone, that perfect zone for learning, that proximal, that's sometimes something we have to close. It's try to find another source. I can always see they're like, oh, I really want to, but they'll
Hmm.
get there. Yeah, in the perfect world, it would be me having the freedom to let them explore what they want and helping
Hmm.
them get there. It's really sometimes just like a management
Hmm.
piece too. They've all got to be
Hmm.
wanting
Now, if we
that.
start to look at some ways to go about it to make your classroom feel a little bit more like that, I'm going to say back to you some things I heard you say that you
Okay.
actually are starting to kind of respond to your own questions, which is what happens usually during these conversations, is that you said that you would like to see students engaging in the topics that they want. But then the challenge is managing that. The reality is, most of us work within a prescribed curriculum to some degree, that there are topics, there might even be a textbook involved or something like that, where there's a prescribed curriculum. So the idea of sort of putting that completely aside and every student doing their individual thing, that's not always going to be the most viable thing to do in our classrooms, to be honest with that. Then our job here, our objective is to find ways to do the both and, because you can't throw the curriculum away. What I heard you talk about was 3 different ways that students can engage. I just want to frame some of the things that you said where you can actually offer some choice. So you talked about topic, choice on topic. If you are giving students a choice of topic, then don't do choice in other areas. So that means, so if we have choice of topic, or we can have the choice of how they engage with a topic, or you have the choice of what they produce in the end. If you do the rose colored glasses you said at the end, it's the topic that they want, they're engaging with it with the manner that they want, and they're producing whatever they want that works best for them. All 3 of those things would be the most individualized learning that would ever happen. And that's what's going to happen at like Innovation Academy, right? So I think what I would suggest to you is, if you look at those 3 areas, there's choice of topic. That means everybody is going to be engaging in the same way. You don't have to create that. Like, everybody is creating a video. Everyone is writing 2 paragraphs. Everyone is having an interpersonal conversation. That part is the non-negotiable. The topic that they choose, maybe in small groups of 2 or 3, that they are all going to collectively write, but every group is doing that. So you don't have to create new things for everyone else. Or everyone is doing the same topic. That's the non-negotiable. We are doing Dia de los Muertos, whatever it might be. But then how they engage with that topic is going to be where the choice comes in. So they could be watching a video. They could be reading something. They could be having conversations about it. Like, that's where the choice comes in. Or then in the end, there's the what, in terms of what they produce. And by that, I'm talking about how they show their mastery, how they demonstrate their mastery. Everybody's doing the same topic. Dia de los Muertos, everyone's doing it. The how, we're all watching a video. But then the how they show their mastery is where the choice comes in. So you have some students that might want to write about it. There's some students that might want to record a video talking about it. So you can see that you have those 3 areas in there, and your ideal classroom in the end had them doing all 3 of those things. And that's where the challenge comes in, particularly when we have a prescribed curriculum. So if you kind of break it down and say, here are these 3 areas, and the choice is only going to come up in one of those areas, that's what's going to keep it manageable. Because you also talked about, how can you keep that all manageable in your classroom to be able to do all that? So keeping one of those 3 topics is where the choice comes in, and the other 2 are the non-negotiables, right? So how does that framework sound to you?
Especially for like that advanced level where they have so much, like we have an incredible amount of freedom. I think that's where they were floundering a lot of times, is because I was letting them choose not only what, how, and how you're going to show me. If I just kind of made it, okay, you can choose whatever you want, but this is what you need to do with it, I think that would do a little more support for them. And yeah, that definitely, because that's kind of where, when they got to the product, is where they were really struggling, because the topic and the choosing things, they didn't seem to, besides here and there needing a little assistance with some of the input they were getting, they chose things that were really pretty good, but they didn't know how to take that into that product. So maybe just saying, okay, this is what you need to create with this, would help, because yeah, that's where they're definitely struggling. And like you said, the management piece, if I know everyone should be doing X, Y, or Z, that I don't have to worry about. If I'm working with Bobby, how to do, how to understand this video he's watching, I don't have to worry about, Susie in the corner watching
Right,
something she shouldn't be
absolutely. Yeah,
watching.
and keeping it all managed that way. You also mentioned there that when you give them very free range, that's where the clunkiness comes in. We're here, you need to get there, but there are 17 roads to get there, and some of them are good roads, some are bad, some will
Yeah.
go really far around. And so students are going to take the different roads, and then they all get there at different times, and that's like a clunky passage. We have
Yeah.
this mindset that creativity means that there are very few guidelines. I did a workshop at the University of Minnesota at the Carla Institute there, and it was about creativity in the language classroom. And it completely changed how I think about creativity. Most creativity comes from having confines of what you can do, because what was found in sort of research is when there are no guidelines or parameters, things end up looking very similar because you tend to mimic other things that you've seen,
Mm,
because you think, oh, this is this completely new idea. But if you are given a blue sheet of paper and a ruler, and you have to come up with a design with those two things, that's where the creativity comes in. That was a random example.
okay.
But if it was just sort of come up with something really cool with two objects, you would have
Okay.
90% of the class something with a pencil and a book, because that would
Hmm.
be the free range you tend to mimic and model other things. So by giving specific guidelines is actually more prone to creativity, and it's not the way we think of creativity. That's where like the
Yeah.
critical thinking comes in. So in terms of giving those more specific guidelines, first off, it's comforting for students. They actually like
Yeah.
that. They like knowing what's going to happen. Then within those guidelines, allow for the creativity for connecting the dots and pairing that with the topic and the how they're going to engage or what they're going to create. One other thing you mentioned was the risk taking, students taking risks. What does that mean to you when you say students are taking risks in my classroom, or if they're risk averse? What does that look like?
They're so used to kind of like a high anxiety classroom and some other classes. So that fear of being, wrong between quotation marks. Am I going to say this wrong? Am I going to, if I'm going to say this, is it going to make sense? You know what I mean? Like, even though they've had all the input and all the practice, creating new phrases, recombining things, and doing it with a certain amount of
Mm-hmm.
confidence. You know what I mean? Like, I want them to feel like I know they can do it. I know they have all the pieces. Just do it. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's okay if you mess up. So many of them are just afraid of making mistakes because they're so used to such high
Mm-hmm.
stakes learning in so many other areas. I feel like they have this trained thing where they're like, I gotta be perfect, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't. There's so much messiness that I want them to
Mm-hmm.
have. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Like there's so many mistakes you have to make before it makes sense, before it
Mm-hmm.
is okay. Sometimes it's actually, like I said, my ones and twos and even the threes, they'll be more willing just to say
Mm-hmm.
crazy stuff. And sometimes you get to some of those upper levels where you might have one or two students who are really, confident and successful, and some of the other ones can be
Mm-hmm.
intimidated or they want to shy away from just
Mm-hmm.
trying it. So yeah, I want them all to have that spirit that, like, you know what, we're just
Mm-hmm.
going to go try this, and if it doesn't work,
Yeah.
it doesn't work, and
Hmm.
no one
In
cares.
terms of the risk taking and the being willing to not be perfect, when
Yeah.
we have the question of choice, which we're talking about, and you say whatever topic, however you want, and produce whatever you want, for a student that's risk averse, that complete
Mm,
autonomy and not even know where to jump in, like that's a high anxiety situation for a student that's going to approach it
it's
that way,
terrifying.
in terms of everybody's doing this topic, so you don't have to find the topic, or you're going to find your topic and this is what you're going to do with it. So spend your time finding the topic. For those students that are not willing to take risks with how they're going to engage, it's everybody's doing this. It mitigates a little bit of the risk taking factors that come
Okay.
in there. You had mentioned earlier as well that you have students that often, when there are options, they go for the gamification option, and that's good as long as we can keep those communicative. They're not a bad thing.
Mhm.
And we also have to respond to this generation. They're a gamification generation. And so, if that plays into our teaching, our parents thought that our generation is going to be the one that ruined the world. Their parents thought that they were going to be the ones. And so, it's our responsibility to say that the next generation is going to ruin the world. And I always just remind people when people say things about Gen Z and millennials and everything. And I'm like, if you've ever stayed in an Airbnb, if you've used an Uber or a Lyft, you need to thank a millennial. We just have to realize that, yes, it's the gamification generation, but they're also the generation of things at their fingertips. They live in a world of next day delivery. They live in a
Mhm.
world of you binge watch the entire show in a weekend. Find ways to engage with that. So if you're doing the topic, everybody's doing this topic, and the how you're going to do it, you're going to create a game with it. And then in the end, the what, everybody is going to write. So whatever you did to create, some students might do art, some students might create a
Mhm.
little book, whatever they're doing, however they're engaging,
Mhm.
they're creating a game. But in the end, everyone's going to write about it. So now you're allowing for that gamification or whatever that is, but then everyone's still producing the same product in the end, and so
Mhm.
there's choice, and you don't have to fight the gamification piece in there. What are
Yep.
some of your takeaways in this conversation in terms of what you might think about a little differently in your classroom about choice?
Well, definitely, especially for like my creativity component for that upper level. Like you said, I had never thought about the falseness of that, what that
Mm-hmm.
choice was, right? Like, was it
Mm-hmm.
really a choice, or were you just going to copy what
Mm-hmm.
this person, what you
Mm-hmm.
think you need to do? I think I need to do a presentation. So I think that will change how I kind of do that project. So I think I might try to limit for the creativity portion specifically, limit what they have to create
Mm-hmm.
with and let them then make that product. I think that will give me better results for that, thinking about it that way, because I think that's really the purpose of that one. And then maybe more of what I was previously doing as creativity, I can shift that into more of an
Mm-hmm.
activity part, because I do have like an activity unit where we talk about what we
Mm-hmm.
do. So then be like, okay, that's where they can have that more of that choice of what they're creating or who they're
Mm-hmm.
studying, more about my activity. So yeah, that's going to be a pivot there that I think will be really, that will really help. Plus, then I won't be so
Right.
confused. And then yeah, with my lower levels, definitely not getting rid of the gamification, because I do love it and it does have a place. But making sure that, if I want them to produce a certain thing, make sure that it's
Mm-hmm.
matching with what I'm asking them to produce. So if you are going to do this, if the purpose was to practice this thing to acquire this skill, that they're still practicing that skill in a way that is similar, so that there's not that
Yeah,
disconnect
I
there.
was going to say, so let's talk about what your action plan is. And you just laid it out very clearly, those three steps. And I particularly appreciated how you mentioned specifically which classes. So with the creativity
Yeah.
with the upper levels and the more novice level students and the gamification, this is what that's going to look like. So by making it so personal and specific to those students, that's what's going to make it achievable, and trying things new like that. Well, that is wonderful. So I really appreciate you having this conversation and allowing other teachers to be a part of this conversation so that it can help them as well. So I'm going to follow up with you, and I'm going to sort of put this all together in a document. I'll share it with you, and then I will check in with you in a couple of months and see how things are going, and maybe we can have another conversation and keep going from there. But thank you very, very much, Jen, for spending this time with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. Feedback and help it's everything. I really appreciate it.
What insights or inspiration did you take away from that coaching session? If you want to dive deeper into your own teaching practice, consider joining me for a Leveling Up episode. Just click the link in the show notes and we can set it up. You'll also see a link while you're there for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. Connect with me on X, aka Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WL Classroom. And for even more valuable resources, visit my website, WLClassroom.com, where you'll find over 300 blog posts about language teaching. So stay inspired, keep growing, and continue making a difference in your language classroom.